Welcome to another exciting Tile of Spain's webinar. My name is Ryan Fazan. I'm the technical consultant for Tile of Spain, for anyone that doesn't know. We're the umbrella group of companies that manufactures tile in all the regions of Spain, mostly centered around the Castellón region, just outside of Valencia. So today's forecast presentation is all about what we saw as we came through 2021 and the end of the year show at Chersai, and everything that the Spanish manufacturers unveiled for novelties to address the coming season in 2022. So we're going to take a bit of a wide-ranging kind of exploration of where we've been and where that can maybe show us going. So before I get started, I want to just let everyone know that there's two major European trade shows of the year. This one is following Chersai, that happens in Bologna, Italy. The next one coming up, and it's kind of monumentous because it's the first one in a couple of years now, since February 2020, is Tevisama, which happens in Valencia, and Tile of Spain and the Trade Commission of Spain hosts a group of design professionals and journalists led by myself and a couple of other industry experts from Tile of Spain. And we take you on an educational trip and learn about architecture and culture and the tile industry and how it's made and all of that good stuff. So it's called the Passport to Creativity. The submissions and applications end this Friday. So if you're interested in coming along with us to Spain this February, I don't know why you wouldn't be, go to tileofspainusa.com and hit up the sign up form just in the top right corner of the homepage. So housekeeping is done, and let's dig into our presentation and see where we're going to go from here. This forecast is all about adapting for diversity. Not adversity, although we've seen our fair share of that over the past couple of years. I think the focus this year and the story I'm going to try to build is all about focusing on adapting for diversity and what that means in terms of our built environment and how us as an industry in tile are addressing that shifting mandate. So like any good sort of plan of attack, we have to have our marching orders. So we're going to go through four kind of stages of our battle plan today, looking at our forecast. We're going to gather our intel. First, we're going to look back on just this past 12 months. Obviously, there's a lot more that goes into it. There's a lot of context that we're carrying with us, but I think it's important to take a look at what we've all experienced over the past year to see how our priorities have shifted, what's influencing us in every field that isn't the built environment, to give us an idea of where our trends are going to shift in terms of tile itself. Then obviously we're going to extrapolate. We're going to get into the strategic portion and how these shifts of consciousness affect tile specifically, and how we can address them and speak to our clients' concerns and shifting lifestyles and priorities and harness this narrative and make changes for the better. Then we're going to get into the meat and potatoes, the meta setting sort of alpha strike of what came out of Chersai and what the new novelties are and where that shows us that we might be going in 2022. And finally, we're going to look at some supporting R&D, some changes and some new technology that's coming out, and what manufacturing and industry initiatives are really speaking to these trends that we're seeing. So our first, as we talked about, is our retrospective. Where did we come from to figure out where are we going? So 2021 was a year, wasn't it? The one thing that is true for us this year is that it's an entire systemic flux. Everything's in flux this year. We saw so many firsts, so many unprecedented things happen. We saw a group of, Reddit cowboys take the New York Stock Exchange for an absolutely historic ride and wind up crashing a couple of stocks through the ceiling and then through the floor. And then we saw a couple of billionaires take that proverbial trip, not to the moon, but at least up to space as well, carrying Amelia Earhart's glasses along for the ride. We didn't see hell freeze over, but we did see Texas freeze over. And up where I live in the Pacific Northwest, we had a heat dome where we had temperatures that actually were higher than they were in the middle of Arizona in this summer. So it's been a year of firsts and shifts in absolutely every single field. And the only kind of thing that we can all agree upon that is going to happen is that change is going to happen, and that the unprecedented is going to happen probably next week. Because if 2021 is any guide, that certainly has happened over the past year. Now, the other thing that I found really interesting is that even though we've got such a digitally connected world, we've started to see some of the pitfalls that come along with that, and how we've addressed our online personas, what's truly important to us, and that actual physical sort of personal connection, as opposed to just digital connection, truly does make a difference in our lives and in our livelihoods, in our mental space, and just across the board in our life. So right now we're figuring out how we're going to emerge from our cocoons, what that looks like, what our levels of comfort are, and what truly is meaningful and is a priority for us. So all of this is having us looking deeper and questioning more, and what's truly important that is going to make an impact. So what this is doing is building a picture that our life, our lifestyle, and just about everything is hybridized or becoming more hybridized. Everything's changing because we're adapting to these crazy, unprecedented events that are hitting us from every arena of our life. And we're having to adapt. We're having to create insular strategies so that we can adapt and move on and carry on with our life in different ways. So what that means is we're hybridizing all of our life. And obviously that means a lot of our spaces are becoming hybridized as well. We're asking a lot more serious questions about the spaces that we're designing, and asking what they ask of us, what they need from us in order to be able to adapt and shift and go with the flow of the unprecedented happening next week or next month or next year, because we're sure it's going to. How flexible are the spaces that we're creating to heavy and varied use cases? We can't just design an office to be an office anymore, or a restaurant just to serve guests food. We're creating spaces that are so much more flexible. And it means that we have to have a very distinct idea, much like a retailer needs to know exactly who his target market is so that they can speak to that perfect clientele. A restaurant, a hospitality environment, or an office needs to know exactly who their target audience is, what they're developing their space for in this new hybridized sort of methodology, how their users are going to use the space, and how they can design to be adaptable, to be contingency agnostic. And that's something that you'll see come up a bunch as we go through this. And how can it help us connect with our world, the people that share it with us, and do this in any kind of space that we're creating. So there was a really interesting article that I found on a modular design build prefab company called DIRTT, D-I-R-T-T. They did a 6 expert, multifaceted expert sort of research article on designing for a hybridized lifestyle. I'd encourage anyone to go take a look at that. But there's all sorts of media out about how our mindset is shifting and how we're developing spaces for this this change in hybridization of our lifestyle. So in retrospect, we're looking and learning how to get back out, and what a social, a responsibly designed, socialized environment looks like, what the needs are, and how that's changed. We've this sense of community and responsibility to our community is one of the most encouraging things that has come out of the past couple of years, and it's encouraging to see that it's enduring in our design and how we're thinking about the products and the spaces that we're creating. Obviously, with this hybridization of our lives and our lifestyle, and this shift from solidly working um, in an office to a blended version of work from home, work in the office, and how that's sort of adapting to every phase of our life, how we're looking at that and reshuffling, making balance king. That safety, stewardship, sensitivity, and creativity go into all of our decision-making processes today when it comes to the spaces that we're creating. So the interesting thing for us as we move into our strategy portion is that ceramics really remain a cohesive answer. Anyone that saw my presentation earlier this year, if you missed it, it's on tilespaneusa.com as well. But ceramics really sort of started to become the cohesive material answer to a lot of the questions that design professionals were asking in 2020 and 2021. And I think we'll see that continue in 2022. Little things really do add up to a big impact. And this is one of the reasons why ceramics are such a big deal for design professionals and clients, the end user today, is that the bandwidth of what our material choices ask of us, what the maintenance regiment is, how often we're going to have to replace it, how resilient it is to living up to these varied use cases. All of these are questions that we're asking now when we're making our material selections for the spaces that we're building. Obviously, on a macro scale, we've seen so many of them over the past couple of years that national and even global disasters are going to continue to happen. So that's another theme that you'll see going on through this, that if you're kind of building to code or meeting standards, that's kind of designing for everything that has happened up to about 10 years ago, which really isn't going to cut it anymore. So on a macro scale, we want to be sort of thinking about what contingencies might be around the corner and how we go beyond what the standards and what the codes are. Because on an even bigger macro scale, on a global macro scale, climate change, fossil fuel reserves. I mean, how many of you wound up in with like gas being a really hard to find commodity at some point this year? I know I did where I'm from, and I saw that happening around all over the place. The Federal Reserve was opened up, and thousands of barrels were issued for that. So fossil fuel reserves, waste mitigation, all of these are really high on our radars right now. So what goes into our materials and how they transition into end of life becomes more and more important. And so tile really does speak to all of these primary concerns. So let's extrapolate a little bit further and see where we go from here and how our industry is looking at what these shifting trends are and how we're going to address them in our product development. This was one thing that I found absolutely captivating this year is the sort of thought that with all the studies that are happening and all the shifts that we're seeing in corporate strategy, whether that's an office building or a restaurant group, that the idea of work is shifting, that with all the changes that were forced upon us over the past 24 months, that we started to see really interesting things emerge through our adapting to these crises. And a lot of businesses are actually learning that a complete in the office isn't the best way to go, a complete work from home isn't the best way to go, but some sort of blend of the two certainly is seeming to be, because there's benefits in both groups of styles of work. And so work used to be a noun, it used to be a place. And you used to say, I'm going to work. And you put on your coat and you got in your car and you did your commute and you went to your office or whatever your place of work was. But nowadays, it's becoming more of a verb. As I said, our lives are becoming a lot more hybridized. So the phrase "I'm going to work" just means now I'm in work mode. And that may be for 10 minutes, it may be for 10 hours. It may be in a physical office space that your company has developed for you to go into. It may be at home, and it may be a blend of those. And so we're designing restaurants, like restaurants today. I met with a restaurant design group that was changing their strategy completely, and they're having to create spaces that have private dining rooms that can offer private parties for groups that want to be safe and insular and still be able to meet up because they're kind of a pod or whatever, but also have them for boardrooms. And they're having Zoom screens and video apparatuses in a restaurant. They're having small meeting spaces and developing tapas menus for small meetings to happen in their lounge areas. So restaurant design is shifting, office design is shifting, because they don't need to accommodate for their entire group of staff at all times. They need to be able to do that 1 or 2 times a year, but they also need to offer different meeting spaces. They need to offer flexible workspaces for people that come in and want to network and need that face-to-face connection, but they're having fewer spaces. So, all of this is adding up to a lot more forethought going into our design today, for not just the spaces and buildings themselves, but even when it comes to city planning. There's some amazing articles this year about city planners and what this shift to hybridized work from home, work in the office, what it's doing to downtown cores and planning for that. And we're seeing, a lot of green spaces being developed in buildings for people to take breaks outside of their office space, be able to get outside, have outdoor meetings. All of this is sort of building into a story that is completely different from the world we had in 2019 and before. Because it is a lot more hybridized, it is a lot more responsive, and that means it has to stand up to a lot more use cases and diverse needs, and as I say, use cases and traffic. So we're asking a lot more of our materials, and when it comes to designing for this hybridized lifestyle, cohesion is extremely important. It's so easy for a building owner operator to understand one maintenance protocol, one use case, and doing that in a material that is, again, here's that word again, agnostic to the aesthetics of it. So that's one of, as I've talked on and on about the renaissance of digital creation, and we'll get into that a little bit later once we hit on trends, that we can create something that not just looks but feels like absolutely anything in a material that is resilient and will stand up to all of these different use cases, that can transition from inside to outside, from floor to wall, and do all of this with one simple maintenance and replacement protocol. It becomes extremely powerful for a design professional and for a building owner operator, whether that's a residence or a commercial space. The agility to be able to flex between all of these use cases with all of these different people and respond to this hybridized lifestyle that we're seeing is extremely powerful for design professionals today. So, like I said, wherever we spend our time, it needs to be supportive of multiple use cases. Last year, as we came out of the really heavy critical lockdowns, a lot of the focus was on our home and how we could expand our home just in case we were going to be confined to it again. And now we're starting to sort of move that thought process into the greater world as things start to relax and we start to realize how we're going to live with this moving forward. We're starting to adapt that thinking to our commercial spaces and even to our city planning and our large communal spaces and the design of our cities itself. So all of this is asking for materials and products to respond to a completely different set of rules and a completely different set of needs, because it's a completely different set of clients that we've got. We've all changed dramatically over the past couple of years. and the bar for what we're asking of our space is rising so much higher, and forcing our material choices to adapt as well. So another thing that I found that was incredibly interesting this year is sort of the changing language of design, and design to be more inclusive, and favor diversity. One thing that I saw was a lot of firms have stopped using the term master bedroom, and changing it to owner's suite. Because the master bedroom or owner's suite now is so much more than just a bedroom. Oftentimes it's a complete spa that spills out into the bedroom. The whole thing's designed as a wet room. And so you need that material to flow all the way through. So we see this material cohesion and the adaptability that offers come more and more into focus for clients today, where you can create a space like this one in the background, where you see terracotta, you see terrazzo, you see brick, you see leather even, and stucco, and yet all of it is glazed porcelain. All of it has one maintenance profile, and it's very easy to adapt that space to any kind of use case, and for a client to understand how to care for that space throughout the lifetime of it. So all of this is building the story more and more for tile to really be the champion of 2022 as we move into this hybridized design style, because designing for the minimum really isn't a viable option anymore. We're looking for to harness the adaptability potential of our space, and you do that with materials that don't care what happens. And the iconoclast of that is tile. So we've come to this realization that we need to be able to weather crises, because they are going to come up. And the material in the spaces have to be as agile and as responsive as we are in adapting to these situations. So that's enough of the background. I just saw something in the chat. Also called primary bedroom. Yeah, thank you, Andy. That's that's another one that I saw coming up. So cheers for that. Now let's get on to the fun stuff. What's happening in novelties and what we're seeing coming out of the end of 2021, and where we're going from here. Now, I just picked 3 colors, but if you look at any of the paint companies are all coming out with their color forecast this year. There's a lot of parity in between them that we're seeing. So I grabbed sort of 3 of the cohesive unified tones. The middle one there is very close to 3 or 4 of the top companies' color of the year. And it seems to be the color that's sort of based all of the themes around. We're seeing a lot of these tones in fashion as well. Now, go back to my presentation from earlier this year. A lot of those colors, a lot of the earth tones and things are still very, very relevant. We're not throwing anything out this year. It's really kind of a maturation and adding to. It's a yes and instead of a yeah but. So these colors are kind of the basis of the overall color tone that we're seeing in a lot of our paints, a lot of our fashion and textiles, a lot of our wallpapers. It's a very green influenced neutral. There's still a lot of beiges and grays, but they have an undertone, a hint of green. And then in contrast to them, we're seeing very saturated, almost a little bit grayed off, but very deep and saturated blues, and rusty tones, things like coral and brilliant raspberries, to offset in counterpoint and contrast in terms of color. So look for a lot of greened off neutrals to be the overarching kind of tone in a lot of simple field. And that's true in a lot of our tile programs as well. Often we're just like we were all the way through 2021, biophilia, a lot of those trends start or continue into 2022 with this reverence for natural materials, for letting the soul of the material come through and letting those natural tones really guide the scheme of our space. So when we are adapting or creating new color and introducing that into our neutral tones, start to look to see it being a little bit green tinted. That can be very dangerous. I know that I'm sure a lot of designers out there kind of wincing at the green tinge, because it can look a little sickly. Although I'm seeing a lot of these tones being very, very fresh. A lot more, sages and olives that are just hints underneath the beige or the gray that give it the shift to lean that way in terms of brighter and more vibrant colors in the fabrics and textiles that are going around them. At least that's what we're doing in tile. Um, so we're seeing a lot less saturation in our neutrals, and still a lot of strong earth tones, because this inviting warmth of raw earth is a very strong counterpoint. These warm, rich wine tones and natural rich berry tones are actually a very good foil for that green and red are on the other sides of the color wheel, so they're very complementary. And we see a lot of these kind of nuanced reddish tones to match and counterpoint the greenish tones of a lot of the field colors. So the softer field colors are enhanced and complemented by more saturated but still grayed off red and warmer tones. One of the things that is continuing in a very big way is this really fine machining of our mold textures, both with the mold itself and with digital augmentation, that we can now design that incorporates and adds to and embellishes upon the mold texture that we're adding. So we're adding layers of form and finish to our materials, so that even if they're a simple, almost monochrome stone look like we have in either of these cases, they've got a micro texture that is partly punch, partly digital augmentation, that's creating this not just visual, but tactile experience. Sorry, I'm going to grab a glass of water here. Not just visual, but tactile experience for our clients, so that anything that we're creating that isn't meant to look like a ceramic is not just visually, but in touch, in feel, in every sense, so engaging and so realistic to the natural form of that material. And that's the other thing that we're really trying to do is not create embellished or worked forms, but really let the soul of the material that we're trying to showcase shine in this ceramic medium. So as I said, this multi-sensory authenticity is coming into our spaces where we're working with different frits and glazes, some that sink into the surface, some that actually puff up or create an adhesive for more medium to be applied digitally, so that we have wood grains, so that we have sparkles and flecks from different chips of material in our terrazzos, so that we have veins that you can not just see but feel in our marbles. This digital technology is supporting the aesthetics and creating a multi-sensory space out of a ceramic piece today. What we can do with our digital augmentation, and I wanted to put this one in, this is from earlier this year, but this is probably the one picture that so many people asked about, and the ability to print organic glues, because they're burned off in the kiln. But what they do is let us print in an adhesive exactly the design that we want. And then we can add granilla or different kinds of fritted glass to the surface with different oxidized pigments, so that we can create color, sheen, texture, and create all sorts of different effects on the surface to augment what we do in our mold. So these are perfectly in line with the wood grains that are in the mold of the material as well. And then we've digitally added glue so that we can put these dry particulates on the surface, so that we can recreate the sap line in this one varietal of wood, so that when you sand it down, you can see that sheen from the sap that's embedded within the grains of this wood. And these are the kind of things that I'm so excited to see in ceramics today. So what we saw, we started to see terrazzos come back in an interesting way, I guess almost 8 years ago now. And they're coming back in a big way today. So let's go go through these again because I don't know any of you that have seen Donegal wool or heathered materials coming into fashion. They're gaining a lot of traction right now because they have that multicolored kind of fleck. It reads, if it's a green sweater in a Donegal wool, it reads as green, but there's so much interest going on in it. And we're starting to use terrazzos and different agglomerate looks in ceramic in much the same way, so that we want something to read as an overall tone, but we still want that interest. We want to add layers to it. And a lot of our programs today offer the same color tones in multi-sized flecks or chips in the terrazzo or agglomerate look, so that we can build layers of interest and have different layers of sizes of aggregate within that matrix, but still have it read as one overall color tone. And that's a really effective way to add layers of interest into a monochromatic or bichromatic space. And I'm seeing a lot of manufacturers lean into that. So start to look for more terrazzos and flecked looks that are all over and even in little pieces throughout the space. We started to see a revival early this year of Art Deco, and that's certainly been embraced wholeheartedly as we move into 2022, both in the metallic accents and especially in the rounded form. Like Steve Jobs fell in love with the rounded rectangle when he was first building the Mac. We seem to be falling back in love with it as well in our tile design in our interior spaces. We're rounding off the corners of our hexagons. We're taking this elongated fish scale. We're taking a lot more organic forms and building in the filigree there, the rounded rectangle as well. So these rounded forms and the metallic accents in a traditional Art Deco design is being given a reboot and playing counterpoint to a lot of the more rustic, kind of nubbly texturized vintage styles. So to give a kind of counterpoint to that and bring a revival of a period specific design form is something very exciting to see. Now, again, this is another sort of revival. And what I do when I'm looking at trends is I always look at every other industry before I look at tile and design. And one of the things that I started to see over the past couple of years, especially in movies and TV shows, in books, in all sorts of different media that we consume on a daily basis, revivals are such a huge thing today. There's a new remake of Ghostbusters. There's a new remake of Dune. Like, you can't shake a stick without hitting a remake of something vintage that was appreciated in its time, and we want to give it a new audience. Now, so we're seeing a lot of revivals come into our design language as well, and this is one that was huge when I started getting early in my time in the industry, the Versailles pattern with the rusticated edge. We're seeing a modernized version of it with a lot less rustication and irregularity in the edge, but it is that modular multi-format pattern that uses the same sort of colorway with quite a bit of variation in multiple different formats. We're seeing it in floor tile, in pavers, and wall tile programs as well, where this modular multi-format feel is coming into a lot of our programs. And it's something that was really, really strong in the early 90s. And it's exciting to see it being given new life this year. And it doesn't feel like a throwback, much like a lot of these movies that have been coming out. They really feel like they've been modernized and they truly have a place in the modern vernacular. And it's cool to see them being done in a new and exciting way. Now, at the beginning and all the way through, we've seen a lot, and I've actually used the term bohemian a couple of slides back. Like, we've seen a lot of really texturized, artisanal, vintage style materials and themes coming through. And obviously that leans into the biophilia, a lot of this raw and natural form. But it's not that we're going back to boho chic or anything like that. There's a really strong sort of contrast of very crisp beautiful, simple materials that let those artisanal products and textures really shine, that give it a counterpoint where it's not all in deep end on all kinds of vintage and things like that. We've got a lot of very crisp, simple, linear products that are coming out as well that serve as a foil to really make both of them shine. The nubbly textures really make the simple architectural details shine, and vice versa. So we're seeing a lot of crisp contrast come into our programs with our larger formats to act as a foil to our smaller formats with more texture and more going on in them. So start to look for this cohesion between large format and small, and hyper modern with artisanal and vintage reboots, because we're seeing a lot of that come in. And for me as a ceramicist and someone with a product development background, especially in wall tile, I love to see the revival of classic ceramics. It's amazing what we can do with technology today, where we can create some of the most beautiful glazes. We're actually getting close to being able to digitally decorate again with glaze as opposed to just ink, and get that beautiful saturation and sheen from an actual glaze, where we can do things today with digital augmentation that it used to take a week, 2 weeks to be able to create these beautiful, varied glazes that would take a shuttle kiln and manual labor and everything to do. We can do it in modern techniques with digital augmentation. So we're seeing this wonderful revival of classic ceramics that aren't trying to look like everything else, that are just ceramics for ceramics sake. And some of the most exciting ones that we're seeing are playing with the geometric space. This center picture, again, was from an earlier presentation with this equilateral triangle in multi-different sheens. I love to see this, this play of solid color with glossy and matte. And we're seeing it in very simple geometrics like an equilateral triangle, the classic cross, simple hexagons, where we're creating, again, layers of texture and color to play off very simple things throughout the design of our tile programs. So vintage has come up. We've seen a lot of reboots in a lot of different areas. And again, this is another area where we get to play with digital augmentation, where we can create tile that's fully glazed, that does have the feel of something that's been there for not just decades, but centuries. We're using different frits and glazes and inks in our digital processes to create these layers of interest, this layer of well-worn love and use, and supporting life throughout the ages, which is one of the biggest things that ceramic does. So we're almost done here. Let's move on to how we're reinforcing what's going on in the design world and what tile is doing to support it. So obviously, as we've discovered going through this today, as the zeitgeist kind of shifts, different concerns float to the fore. We are going to be thrown more curveballs, and we are looking at the resource efficiency and the end of life risk and ask of the different materials that we're choosing, not just for our floors and walls and for our bathrooms, but for our outside hardscapes. Like we talked about, even city planners are starting to look at how they're developing the roofscapes and the hardscapes around the buildings and the multi-use facilities that we're designing today. We're starting to look much more critically at what that means, not just 10 years down the road, but multi-generationally, and what that means for the changes that we're going to experience. And so the reason I said all the way through this that tile really speaks to all of what's going on in the shifts of design, in the shifts of our priorities and our lifestyle and everything, is that inherently tile just answers all the questions that we're asking of materials and our spaces today. It's safe, it's durable, it's livable, it allows us to optimize our time our experience, our adaptability, the inherent characteristics of ceramic when they're made by a conscientious and high-level manufacturer, so far outstrip what other materials can offer, especially in context of the hybridization that's going on in the spatial planning and design that we're doing today. So if any of these are interesting for you, there's all sorts of resources on the website in the education section, in the sustainability section. But having a material that can be more anti-slip when it's wet than when it's dry, that's 0 VOC as opposed to just low. All of these things are something that I bring up in every single one of my sessions and every single one of my client meetings, because there's nothing else that does offer all of these benefits and all of the fashion and all of the forethought that we've talked about all the way through today. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about, there is TCNA locally in the US is doing testing now, and there are manufacturers that are developing antimicrobial and antiviral coatings for their materials. There's excuse me, all sorts of different ways that they can go about it. There's a couple of different proprietary styles of doing it, but they're always encapsulated within the glaze and an active catalyst to support antimicrobial and antiviral properties in the tile. So that's another thing that is a really exciting range of research and development that we're doing in the industry, and trying to add value where there's already a lot to be had to respond to what's going on. So that's it for me today. I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time out of your day, especially in this crazy Christmas season at the end of this crazy year, to join with us and talk about tile and hear about what's going on. I see that someone has raised a hand. If you've got a question, go ahead and drop it in chat or Q&A.
Ryan, I'm going to pop in. There's a couple questions came in over the chat.
Oh, okay.
From Leslie Godden. Can you talk more about the term agnostic as it relates to materials?
So that it is ambivalent either way. It doesn't matter. So when I say contingency agnostic, it doesn't really matter what happens. Tile is going to be able to address a lot of situations, from fire to flood to everything else. When I say material agnostic, it's that it doesn't matter. Again, it's not you don't have to change materials. You don't have to go from wood to cement to ceramic to whatever else. Physically, it can be done digitally in ceramic, and you can keep one maintenance profile and things like that. So I hope that clears it up, Leslie. If you have a follow-up, go ahead. What else?
Okay, and then we have another question from Rowan Brossum. With the increase in textural offerings, is there concern over cleanability?
So generally not, especially if, I mean, it depends on what you're designing your space for, whether it's commercial or residential, and where it's being used and what the traffic profile is. But generally, with a glazed surface, depending on the dryness of the frit that they use, cleanability with texture is usually not an issue, especially if it is a fully glazed surface. It depends on the glaze. Like if you fall in love with something that has an in-out glaze profile, and you want to use it, somewhere that is going to have a lot of soil or traffic, it does take a bit more, because that's a much drier glaze that has a higher slip resistance. So, that's a lot of that is having a good a good rep that knows their products really well. If that's a concern, the best thing that I always do with clients myself, like if I'm working with a client and helping specify, I just take stuff home and I torture it and see, with the general use case that is going to be applied, and I always go over and above what could possibly be applied. And like I've been known to put soy sauce and soil and all sorts of stuff and then bake it in the oven, and see how cleanable it is. So generally, you can always really test, but in the texturized surfaces, that's one of the biggest concerns I see a lot of people have is, oh, that texture, am I going to be able to clean it? If it's fully glazed, glaze is predominantly glass. Once it's sintered, it's an impervious surface. And as I said, as long as it's a smoother surface that isn't a dry-ish grit, like something that's made for flooring, especially for outdoors, then the cleanability usually isn't an issue.
Okay, thank you. Then we have a question from Molly McCabe. Can you speak to the material shortages in the tile industry?
Generally, I mean, to the best of my knowledge, from what I've experienced myself, that generally is more to do with logistics problems than actual shortages of material, whether raw material or finished goods. And I think a lot of those are getting a lot better than they were certainly at the beginning of the year. But logistics have been, a challenge for distributors and for manufacturers to deal with throughout the year, for sure. Costs have increased dramatically, and timelines have been unreliable at best. So, it is one of the challenges that we've had this year. And I know that a lot of distributors are changing their purchasing strategies and what they're doing for inventory strategies. And a lot of manufacturers are working with financing companies to increase the terms that they're offering for their clients. I think that was
Okay.
That was the end of it for Molly.
Okay.
Molly, if you have any follow-ups, feel free to reach out.
All right, and then one last question we'll take. Before we get to the question, I just want to make note that this presentation will be available on tileofspainusa.com in the next day or two under the Video Learning Center. So if you missed any portion of it, or if you just want it for reference, please feel free to go back and check it out. Lots of messages for happy holidays. Happy holidays to everybody who joined us.
Same to all of you, yes.
And then our final question will be, and this is Ronaldo DeSantis, is there a direction towards color glazed lava stone tiles?
Whoa, that's very specific.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's not something I've seen, although I have seen quite a few lava stone or basalt because of that texture, and because it tends to be a very iconic stone that's really recognizable, and it does sort of fit in within that, letting the soul of the material kind of shine through. I don't, if that sounds a bit too specific to not be a very specific kind of idea on product development or something like that. And if that's the case, it certainly wouldn't be a bad way to go. There are a couple of companies that specialize in glazing lava stone. It's very, very difficult to do, speaking from experience. And there's certainly a lot of ways, with both with sinking inks and with mold texture, to be able to achieve that that pitted kind of structure of a lava stone or basalt. So adding color into the modern palette, that's something that we do a lot in product development, where we, a certain stone look or a certain type of cement is very on trend right now, but we want to have it in a modern palette, and digitally we can do that very, very easily in Photoshop and other design tools now. So adding modern colors in a modern palette to a basalt line probably would be a great idea and would fit very well into into what's going on and authentic material trends. So
Okay, I think that answers all of the questions.
cool. Thanks, Kelly.
Okay.
Oh, one more.
Great.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Ronaldo. All
Okay.
right, everybody, you all be safe and have happy holidays. And thank you on behalf of Tile of Spain for spending some of your afternoon or morning, wherever you are with us. Take care and bye-bye.